Elon Musk has more control over your money than you think. And of course, I'm talking about Elon Musk's Tesla and the Tesla stock that has so much, gaining control by the day, it seems, over the S&P 500, over other stock market indices. It's a huge portion of the NASDAQ now as well. We're going to focus on the S&P 500 here today, as it is pretty much the primary investment vehicle for those in the U.S. here and for many globally. And now, given this top 10 holding that Tesla holds and the amount that stock moves, which we'll get into here in a second, Elon Musk, a huge influence over your money, especially if you're a passive investor who's got, substantial 401k money, IRA money that's sitting just long the stock market, which isn't a bad thing. That's, S&P 500 is a very diversified market, and that's why 61% of Americans own stock, and there's almost 400 billion invested in the S&P 500 ETF, and even more than that invested in the S&P 500 as a whole, as there's so many different varieties of that, the different sectors that people break out and buy. This is all to say that a lot of people are invested in the stock market, and for the most part, the stock market is the S&P 500. It's one of the, if not the most invested in vehicle here for passive investors in 2023, but also for the last several years. And you'll know, or maybe you don't know, that the S&P 500, it's 500 stocks, but its weightings for all the different individual stocks are created based on how big the companies are. Okay, well, Frank, how do you gauge how big a company is, how big a stock is? Well, how many shares are there, and how much do each of those shares cost, and you multiply those two numbers together, you get a market capitalization, and that tells you essentially how big that stock is. The biggest stock is Apple, worth more than $1 trillion. Apple and Microsoft, I believe, the only stocks that are worth more than $1 trillion as of today. But another company that has risen substantially to be a top 10 holding in the S&P 500, so essentially one of the 10 largest companies here in the U.S., public companies of the world, Tesla, now a top 10 holding. It's been as much at its peak at $400 a share, was 2.5%, almost 3% weighting of the S&P 500. Right now, made its way back into the top 10, 1.6% weighting. And so just wrap your mind around what exactly that means. The S&P 500, okay, I've got, my 401k or my other passive investment in the S&P 500. Well, I'm diversified across 500 stocks, which you are, and it's, relative to just owning Tesla outright or owning Apple outright or these different markets, the S&P 500 is a diversified product. But given that it does weight its stocks based on the size of the company, and it can become top heavy, 500 stocks, that's great diversification. But one of them here, Tesla, is worth about 1.6% of any money that you have invested in the S&P 500. And recently, just a year ago, that was almost 3%. And so if you have $10,000 invested in the S&P 500, almost 3% of that recently has been Tesla. And so really, really big influence that Elon and the coming sales of new Teslas and everything else has over your money and potential future here. And not only is it the weighting aspect, because you'd say, well, Frank, Apple and Microsoft are about 6-7%, depending on the day. Amazon has more weighting as well. So does Google. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But Tesla moves a lot more than Apple and the rest of those stocks. So not only is it a a large weighting. It's not the biggest weighting, but of the large weightings, it is one of the most, if not the most volatile stocks. So potentially having more influence than some of these, Apples, Microsofts, and Amazons. And you look at the last year of action here in percentage terms, and yeah, it's nice to see, hey, Apple's up 20%, 25%. And it's the largest weighting. That's, you could attribute a lot of the S&P 500's positive price action in this time frame that we're looking at, the S&P being in orange and the Apple being in blue. A lot of that upside has been from Apple's great performance over the last year. But you look at that green line there in Tesla, and though Tesla for the last year of trading is around unchanged year to date. If you're looking just smack dab from the middle of this chart on, this market is up 100%, has been able to double in price from its lows at the end of 2022. But as of right now, for the last year of trading, Tesla is unchanged. But look at the fact that it was at one point plus 20%, was at one point minus 60%. Those are huge, huge moves, again, leading to how high of a volatility stock this is. And actually, I crunched the numbers on current volatilities for each of the top holdings in the S&P 500. In Tesla, though it is the 8th largest stock in the S&P 500 by weighting, it is the most volatile stock by a mile. Its 68% volatility is more than 3 times the volatility of Apple, compared to Microsoft, Amazon, NVIDIA, more than double their volatilities there. And then, of course, Berkshire is very diversified stock there, and Tesla is more than 4 times as volatile as Berkshire, even though that's a larger weighting. So I would contend Tesla more, Elon Musk, that is, more of an influence over the S&P 500 and passive investors' money than Warren Buffett, which is maybe make people a little bit squeamish, but depending, obviously, I guess, on who you ask. But volatility is definitely part of this equation. You can't just look at the largest market cap, because that's a good example. There is Berkshire being, maybe around 2% and Tesla being around 1.5%. Well, Tesla is more than 4 times as volatile, and so probably going to move the needle for the S&P 500 and thus passive investment more than Berkshire would. And just as a final number here to kind of get your mind around how much sway Elon and Tesla has over the S&P, at its current projection right now at a weighting of 1.6% of the S&P and a volatility of almost 70%, on an annual basis, Tesla is projected to move the S&P 500 by 1%, one way or the other. Essentially, given current projections from the options market and the current weighting of Tesla, in the next year of price action, or in a given year, Tesla would project to, if it's had a bullish year or a bearish year, move the S&P 500 up or down by a full percentage point. Now, that doesn't feel like or seem like a lot. 1% influence, I mean, that's nothing. But when you take into account that the S&P 500 stocks there, that garners so much investment here in the U.S. and abroad as well, averages about 6% annually. That really can mean a lot. And so if the S&P 499, if everyone save Tesla, is averaging, up 6%, it hits its average for the next year's worth of price action, Tesla could bring that down to 5% or could jump it up to 7%. And that's the projected amount, all else equal, for coming years. And so when you think about your money as a passive investor, and the fact that passive investors tend to be invested for, decades, that can really build up. That can be the difference between, in a 10-year run, bringing in 60% versus 50% versus 70%. So really substantial influence here. If that's something that you don't want, you can, of course, hedge this out. If you want more of it, of course, you can build next to your S&P 500 investments, more Tesla investment. If you want to not only take it out, but put some optionality on it, you can start talking about, selling calls against your passive investment, given that Tesla is such a substantial influence over. Of course, you wouldn't want to overhedge, so make sure you crunch all the numbers on that. But big influence Elon and Tesla have over the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ, and thus over your money and passive investment here in 2023.